Welcome to Business Reporter's Mergers and Acquisitions campaign hosted by the Telegraph Online. I'm Rachel Hicks. Business owners who've started and sometimes for 2 or 3 decades developed their company might decide to harvest the value of their enterprise by selling it. But when selling, many misconceptions and a limited understanding of the mergers and acquisitions process often prevents them from getting the right deal. They may undersell, sell to the wrong home and enter into a deal with disadvantageous conditions, or simply set off a sale process that was always likely to fail before reaching the finish line. So how to find the right expert and what we can expect from them are what we're going to discuss today with Jim Keeling from Corbett Keeling. Jim, welcome. Now, imagine I have my own business and I'm approached to sell it. What should I do?
Well, the first thing, Rachel, actually is to do nothing, not to send information as a knee-jerk reaction to the buyer of the business or the supposed buyer of the business. It's almost impossible not to make a bad first impression, or let me put it differently, not to make the best possible first impression. And once you've made an impression on a buyer, it's very difficult to backpedal from that first impression you made on them. Presenting a business is a delicate and complex process. Stop, think, take advice, prepare the case as carefully as possible to present to the buyer, and then proceed from there.
Okay, so the key point is not to be too keen then in that case.
Yes.
So how do I know how much my business is worth, what my brand value is?
It's a complex question that. Our job initially is to help you work out, in theory, what is the correct value of your business. You'd be amazed at how often clients and prospective clients come into our offices and they're out by a factor of 50% in the theoretical value of their business, plus or minus 50% or sometimes more. That's the theoretical value. We'll help you take a view on that and get in a position where you can make a decision as to whether you want to go ahead with a sale of the business. But what is, of course, far more interesting to you is the practical value, the value that you can achieve, that with our help maybe you can achieve when you actually sell the business. And that's driven by all sorts of factors. Perhaps the most important is the future cash flows of their business, which will become the property of the new owner of the business. And it's about the certainty of those cash flows and the growth of those cash flows. But it's not only the cash flows in their business, it's the impact that their business will have on the cash flows of the buyer. For example, the buyer may be able to sell their products and services to the customers of the business that they're acquiring. And then there'll be a step change in the buyer's cash flows. Then that buyer will have a particular desire to buy your business.
You talked about companies coming to you and undervaluing or overvaluing their companies by up to 50%. What sort of common mistakes are they making to reach those figures?
They may, for example, be looking at this year's profits instead of next year's profits. And if the business is growing quickly, maybe the business is growing at 30%, and maybe the buyer will really be much more focused on next year's profits. After all, that's what will drive the cash flow that the buyer will get. And a business is typically valued on a multiple of profits. So last year's profits, next year's profits, 30% difference in the valuation.
How would I maximise the value of my business if I was selling it?
Well, there are lots of aspects of this. So as well as the cash flows, you need to get to the best possible buyer of your business. And there are different kinds of buyers. So there are trade buyers, that's your competitors. There are financial buyers, which might, for example, be private equity firms. Roughly half of businesses that are sold go to trade, and roughly half go to financial buyers. It could be a domestic buyer, or it could be an overseas buyer. Roughly a third of businesses go to overseas buyers and 2/3 go to domestic buyers. So the key is to have the widest possible range. But you'd be amazed at how often clients come into our offices with an almost completely firm prejudice against one sort of buyer or another. So one client came in and said, I will not go anywhere near private equity. Okay, so we focused, because they insisted on it, on trade. And we got them 6 offers from trade. And then they decided that actually fitting the culture of their business with the culture of another business was going to be rather complicated and difficult. So after all, they didn't like trade. Well, they'd allowed us to, maybe we'd persuaded them, I'm not quite sure which, to approach one private equity buyer along the way. And they'd also got one offer from private equity. So they said to us, actually, that looks a bit more interesting. We don't have the culture problem with private equity. So could you go out and get us some more offers? We got them 7 more offers from private equity. It was quite a good process, this, with all these offers coming in. And we whittled that down to 3, and they ended up getting about 50% more than they had expected from a buyer that they had thought in the first place they wouldn't ever approach.
And you mentioned a number of different types of buyers there. How would a company know which is the best one to go for?
At the end of the day, most sellers are motivated by getting the maximum value. And it is not clear that the maximum value comes from either trade or private equity, i.e. either trade or a financial buyer. It could be either. There are reasons why trade sometimes pays more, for example, because they can sell their products from the buyer into the seller's customer base. But there are reasons that financial buyers can pay more as well, because they're more nimble about applying gearing, for example, to the businesses that they buy.
So if I do decide to sell, explain the process to me step by step, and how could I speed it up, for example? Because it can take a long time.
Over the 25 years that we've been running Corbett Keeling, we've developed quite a well-honed process for selling businesses. And it starts with 2 stages of preparation. The first is even before you finally commit to the process. The question there is this actually the best moment to sell your business? Or should you adjust aspects of your business before you go any further? And if there are aspects of your business that you can adjust and it makes a step change in value, well, why not do that? It might take a matter of weeks, it might take a matter of months. It depends how urgent it is for you. That's the first step, and we take our clients through that process to help them make that decision. The second step, having committed to a sale, is, I'm afraid, further preparation, which is to get the information on your business ready in the best possible light. We would typically be looking at the key selling messages for the business. What are the aspects of your business that'll make it most attractive to the buyer? And we set out all the information about your business under those probably 6 or 7 key selling messages. Then we put together a list of buyers of your business, and we agree with you as the seller which ones we should approach. Then we approach them. Then we narrow that down into a smaller group of buyers who are really interested. And then we take 1 or 2 of them through from their heads of terms, from their letter of intent, all the way through to the contract at the end of the process, at which point the money is delivered to you. But that's the process. And within that, it is vital that your advisor can be nimble and can change direction if necessary. So you need a process, but you need to be able to change direction as well. And maybe the best possible example of that I've got is a business that came to us a few months back. They said to us, crikey, we've been locked in this sale process with our advisor for 18 months and absolutely nothing has been achieved. They've been out far and wide to buyers, but nothing has been achieved. What can we do? And yes, there was a process there, but I'm afraid all I can say is that the advisor wasn't very good at thinking outside the box. And it was quite simple. Actually, what was needed there was to look at this not as a trade sale, but as a management buyout. They'd been at it for 18 months. 3 months later, we had arranged the transaction for them. And in fact, we had 3 buyers for it who were competing to buy it.
But doesn't it damage a business if you put a big for sale sign up? You have this dichotomy, don't you, where you've got to say you're for sale to start finding potential buyers. How do you manage that?
Well, it does not have to be a risky process, and it can be contained. One client came to us, and quite rightly, confidentiality for a client is of paramount importance. And they made our lives really difficult by saying that they didn't want us to approach any of their close competitors at all. So all the sort of natural trade buyers of this business were actually ruled out. Nevertheless, we went out and found some buyers, but they made it doubly difficult, in fact, an almost Herculean task, because they said we were not allowed to talk to any of their staff until after the transaction had been completed. Now that makes it quite difficult, but in a sense it played to our strengths at Corbett Keeling. What we do at Corbett Keeling is to sell businesses that are valued at probably 10 to 150 million. The businesses are making, say, 1 to 10 million pounds profits. And those businesses don't, or normally, generally, don't have the sort of systems in place that a global, international, probably quoted business with a value of billions of pounds would have. They may not have a full-time finance director always. They may not have a fully developed HR resource. They may not be used to doing transactions the whole time. They may not have the information available. Our whole process at Corbett Keeling is aimed at those businesses in that size bracket. So we get in there and we apply the same process to them that would be applied to a much bigger business, but with us rolling our sleeves up and getting inside the business and getting the information out that then has to be presented to the buyers.
So how would a business know whether they had found the right buyer?
We talk about actually the 4 C's of a perfect transaction. Cash, the amount of cash you get. Complexity in the cash you get. Does it come with bells and whistles that are uncomfortable? The chemistry between the buyer and the seller. Does that work for you as the seller? And the certainty of the transaction. Can you get from the letter of intent to the end of the transaction with certainty? So the best buyer is the one that combines maximum cash, minimum complexity, maximum certainty, and the best possible chemistry between the buyer and the seller.
Going back to my business again, I've been running it for decades. It's very successful. I've sold it, to customers very successfully. I've trained my team to successfully sell.
Yeah.
Why would I need a third-party expert to come and sell my business for me?
The issue here is that selling the products and services of a business is different in a whole range of ways from selling the business itself. The process is different too. So, for example, when one gets towards the end of the process and the letter of intent has to be converted into a binding contract, normally one has to go exclusive with one of the buyers that one's talking to at that stage. And from that moment of going exclusive, the vendor or the seller is at their most vulnerable to the buyer. And so getting the maximum certainty at that moment that the buyer is not going to be able to wriggle and to change the terms of the deal is absolutely vital. And I'm pleased to say that on the last 2 deals that I've done, we've managed to get all the way from the letter of intent to the contract through due diligence, through all the compiling all the contractual terms without actually any material changes in the terms at all.
So why did you set up Corbett Keeling?
Since I was a child, since I was a teenager, and as I was growing up, I was fascinated, I don't really know why, but I was fascinated by valuations, by deal structures, by ownership structures of businesses. And then in my 20s, as I came into the city, I saw what you might call old-fashioned values of trust and integrity and delivering best services in advice to clients, sort of, I suppose, slightly starting to unravel. It was around the time of Big Bang in the 1980s, and maybe that was the trigger. And I said to myself, how am I going to get into a position where I can deliver the best service with integrity, with truthfulness to my client? And I decided the only way to do that was to start from the ground up. So that's what I did, building a network of sector specialists covering all sectors, building geographic reach that goes into every major nation in the world, every major trading nation, building an understanding of financial buyers and funders of businesses that I believe is second to none, and building the relationships with those trade buyers, with those overseas buyers, with those financial buyers, so that we can get the best result for our clients. And that's what we've continued to do over the 25 years that we've been running our business, and we still do today. So our values create more value for our clients. Our values, the way we do business, why we do business, create more value, pounds consideration, millions of pounds of consideration in our clients' hands at the end of the day.
Jim, it's been a fascinating insight into the M&A world. Thank you so much for joining us. Jim Keeling from Corbett Keeling.
Thank you, Rachel.